Okay, it's been a bit since I've done a chapter of this. It's just been crazy. I started a new job with a really heavy commute time. When I say heavy commute time, 4 hours a day. But it's on a train, mostly on a train. I have to drive about 20 minutes to 30 minutes to get to the train stop or bus stop. It depends on, right now the tracks are under construction, so doing the bus. So I get to do a lot of LP work, but I obviously can't record videos, though it might not be the weirdest thing I've seen on the train. But getting back into a schedule where I'm getting used to it. So we are going to do chapters. My little bookmark thing got all weird. We're going to be doing chapters 11 and 12, and we'll continue to proceed forward. I'm just going to dog ear this page because I have this cute little like book thing, but it doesn't do well when you're trying to read with the book open. So this is Benjamin Tucker. Now that's one I've heard before. Some of the people in this anthology I've not heard before. And this is from State, Socialism, and Anarchism, How Far They Agree and Wherein They Differ. And you know how I do. I tend to record this in bits, so I might not get all of it recorded tonight. You might see a costume change because I finish it tomorrow. So the intro blurb is individualist, anarchist, and publisher Benjamin R. Tucker was one of the most important radicals in American history. Now that's quite a epithet. That's quite an attribution. I could only wish to ever be called an important radical. His long-running periodical Liberty, which I have the copies of, man, it's a stack, was home to essays from anarchists and socialists. Not a fan of that, but okay, of all stripes, at a time when socialism did not necessarily have the contemporary meaning of government control. So, alrighty. In the same way that there are many answers as to what anarchism would look like in practice, socialism too had many variants. Here, Tucker tries to define and contrast the two concepts. So is Tucker an anarcho-socialist but not state socialist? We'll see. So this is written after that bomb throwing incident we saw in Chicago, where those anarchists were hanged. Okay, it says, just reading selected quotes as I do, it is a curious fact that the two extremes, and it's talking about anarcho-socialism and state socialism, of the vast army now under consideration, though united by the common claim that labor should be put in possession of its own, are more diametrically opposed to each other in their fundamental principles of social action and their methods of reaching the ends aimed at than either is to their common enemy, the existing society. Listen, I don't think this will offend anybody in my audience, but I have to tell you, each time I read a sentence like that labor should be put into possession of its own, I just throw up in my mouth. Your labor is in possession of yourself, and you choose to go work for someone else or you start a business, particularly in today, okay? In America today, though I know the government makes it very difficult to start a business. I'm saying, go do your gray market, black market thing, even if you wanted to. But you can have all of your labor to yourself if you choose to. But if you're going to go use somebody else's efforts, like I just find that statement just so repugnant. Like it's one of those things that sound pretty, but is really, really very ugly. It's like lipstick on a pig. The two principles referred to are authority and liberty, and the names of the two schools of socialistic thought, which fully and unreservedly represent one or the other of them, are respectively state socialism and anarchism, and there is no halfway house between them. After this movement, so it's talking about after the current order of things, as he says it, is gotten rid of, after that's done, the ultimate and bitterer conflict will still be to come between those two camps. What a final victory for the state socialists will mean, and what a final victory for the anarchists will mean, is the purpose of this paper. The economic principles of modern socialism are a logical deduction from the principle laid down by Adam Smith in the early chapters of his Wealth of Nations, namely that labor is the true measure of price. But Adam Smith, after stating this principle most clearly and concisely, immediately abandoned all further consideration of it to devote himself to showing what actually does measure price and how, therefore, wealth is at present distributed. Is Tucker here advocating the labor theory of value? Since his day, nearly all the political economists have followed his example by confining their function to the description of society as it is in its industrial and commercial phases. Socialism, on the contrary, extends its function to the description of society as it should be and the discovery of the means of making it what it should be. Half a century or more after Smith enunciated, that's pretty funny to mispronounce enunciated. Irony. The principle above stated, socialism picked it up where he had dropped it, and in following it to its logical conclusions, nope, big bucket of nope, made it the basis of a new economic philosophy. It says, interest, rent, and profit, that these three constitute the trinity of usury. I don't have nearly enough wine for this. And are simply different methods of levying tribute for the use of capital, that capital being simply stored up labor, which has already received its pay in full. Like, you can't get an investment on your labor. Oh my God, like, this just sounds so ultimately poverty-inducing to me. I don't think, this is definitely going to be, like, in stages, because I can only take so much of this socialist shit. Its use ought to be gratuitous, fuck me, fuck you, yes, on the principle that labor is the only basis of price, that the lender of capital is entitled to its return intact and nothing more, then why would anyone lend? Oh my God. And the only reason why the banker, the stockholder, the landlord, the manufacturer, and the merchant are able to exact usury from labor lies in the fact that they are backed by legal privilege. No, that is not, that, you know, I don't know why people find that argument so convincing. It's like, it's even difficult to argue against it because it's so stupid. It's like just somebody saying the most ridiculous thing to you and then tell you to refute it. And you're like, are you okay? Like, is there a screw rolling around loose in there? It doesn't have to be legal privilege. It does, however, when you're dealing with property and whose rightful property gets backed by force. But force isn't always legal privilege. Even in, like not anarchist like he's saying, but even in an anarcho-capitalist society, it's not necessarily legal privilege, but it is the justified use of force. And he would argue the justified use of force, I believe, as well, to stop usury. I would say what he calls usury. I would say, if he's going to use legal privilege in that way, the only way that you can stop people from wanting a profit on their quote-unquote stored-up labor is through legal privilege. In other words, force. That the, or monopoly, and that the only way to secure labor the enjoyment of its entire product or natural wages is to strike down monopoly. So, state socialism, which may be described as the doctrine that all the affairs of men should be managed by government regardless of individual choice. Well, we definitely see the force there. To the individual can only belong the products to be consumed, not the means of producing them. My God, what a hellscape. Now, he's not in favor of the state socialism he's describing. A man may own his own clothes and his food, which took labor to produce, but not the sewing machine which makes his shirts. God, the distinction is at the margins so arbitrary. At the margins where they meet. I guess maybe margins, not at the intersections. Or the spade which digs his potatoes. Product and capital are essentially different things. The former belongs to individuals, the latter to society. The nation must be transformed into a vast bureaucracy and every individual into a state official. Now, that is insightful there. That under state socialism, every individual is a state official. Every man will be a wage receiver and the state the only wage payer. The remedy for monopolies is, I like his takedown here of state socialism. He says the remedy for these capitalistic monopolies is bada bing, monopoly. What other applications this principle of authority, once adopted in the economic sphere, will develop is very evident. It means the absolute control by the majority of all individual conduct. He is correct. The right of such control is already admitted by the state socialists. Though they maintain that, as a matter of fact, the individual would be allowed a much larger liberty than he now enjoys. But he would only be allowed it. He could not claim it as his own. There would be but one article in the Constitution of a state socialistic country. The right of the majority is absolute. Whatever, then, the state socialists may claim or disclaim, their system, if adopted, is doomed to end in a state religion, to the expense of which all must contribute and at the altar of which all must kneel, a state school of medicine, by whose practitioners the sick must invariably be treated, a state system of hygiene, prescribing what all must and must not eat, drink, wear, and do. It's funny as I'm reading this, did I already do this chapter? It doesn't matter. I'll do it again because I'm sure I have different comments because I obviously don't remember if I did, but I want to go look on my channel and see if I did. We'll finish it either way. Because this, and I could just be remembering from me reading it, but this is so familiar. So what was the last chapter I did on this? No, I did 8 and 10, so this is 11 and 12. This, I must just be remembering it from reading it. I remember thinking that this paragraph was so good. A state school of medicine, we did that. A state system of hygiene, prescribing what all must and must not eat, drink, wear, and do. A state code of morals, which will not content itself with punishing crime, but will prohibit what the majority decide to be vice. A state system of instruction, which will do away with all private schools, academies, and colleges. A state nursery, in which all children must be brought up in common at the public expense. And finally, a state family, with an attempt at stipiculture? What's that? Or scientific breeding. Sounds like some kind of eugenicist thing, in which no man or woman will be allowed to have children if the state prohibits them, and no man and woman can refuse to have children if the state orders them. Thus will authority achieve its acme, and monopoly carried to its highest power. Just looking at how much we've got, quite a bit left here. So he then goes on to anarcho-socialism, and we will pick that up next time. I'm gonna leave this here so I remember to continue, but it keeps me fresh when I break it up into these various sections. So you'll see this as one video, but it'll be a different day for me. Obviously, it's been a few days since I've been back to this recording. My hair is much brighter than it was in part 1, but let's continue. It's just been a super hectic week. So it says this may bring us, or this does bring us, excuse me, not may, to anarchism, which may be described as the doctrine that all the affairs of men should be managed by individuals or voluntary associations and that the state should be abolished. Absolutely agree, but here's where some presuppositions about property and rights come into play. He says, when Warren and Proudhon, I think I'm pronouncing that right, I always mispronounce that name, and prosecuting their search for justice to labor, came face to face with the obstacle of class monopolies, all of that, just lose me with that right there. They saw that these monopolies rested upon authority and concluded that the thing to be done was not to strengthen this authority and thus make monopoly universal, but to utterly uproot authority and to give full sway to the opposite principle, liberty, by making competition the antithesis of monopoly universal. Okay. Marx, as we have seen, solved it by declaring capital to be a different thing from product and maintaining that it belonged to society and should be seized by society and employed for the benefit of all alike. Proudhon scoffed at this distinction between capital and product, and I would agree with Proudhon there. He maintained that capital and product are not different kinds of wealth, but simply alternate conditions or functions of the same wealth, absolutely, and that all wealth undergoes an incessant transformation from capital into product and from product back into capital, the process repeating itself interminably, that capital and product are purely social terms, that what is product to one man immediately becomes capital to another, and vice versa, that if there were but one person in the world, all wealth would be to him at once capital and product, that the fruit of A's toil is his product, which, when sold to B, becomes B's capital, unless B is an unproductive consumer, in which case it is merely wasted wealth outside the view of social economy, that a steam engine is just as much product as a coat, and that a coat is just as much capital as a steam engine, and that the same laws of equity govern the possession of one that govern the possession of the other. Now, we disagree on these laws of equity, but the definitional items here, I would agree with Proudhon. For these and other reasons, Proudhon and Warren found themselves unable to sanction any such plan as the seizure of capital by society. But though opposed to socializing the ownership of capital, they aimed nevertheless to socialize its effects by making its use beneficial to all instead of a means of impoverishing the many to enrich the few. And when the light burst in upon them, they saw that this could be done by subjecting capital to the natural law of competition, thus bringing the price of its own use down to cost. Never happened. That is, to nothing beyond the expenses incidental to handling and transferring it. Never happened. So they raised the banner of absolute free trade at home as well as with foreign countries, the logical carrying out of the Manchester doctrine, laissez-faire, the universal rule. Under this banner, they began their fight upon monopolies, whether the all-inclusive monopoly of the state socialists or the various class monopolies that now prevail. There will always be classes, even when you pretend there are not. It was obvious to Warren and Proudhon that as soon as the individualists should no longer be protected by their fellows in anything but personal occupancy and cultivation of land, what if you protect yourself? And what if your fellows realize that it's in their... Never mind. We already know our own beliefs. Let's just continue with theirs. Ground rent would disappear, and so usury have one less leg to stand on. And that's the way you impoverish everybody. Trying to... I'm trying to see... Were we going to go through, because I forgot from the beginning of this episode, how far we were going in chapters. I have it here on my computer. I think why is this? Well, we'll just keep going while that's loading up. All of their thought rested upon a very fundamental principle: the freedom of the individual, his right of sovereignty over himself, his product and his affairs, and of rebellion against the dictation of external authority. And it's still loading. We're going to go back. Let's see if perhaps it's my computer. Let's go to the next screen here and see. What chapter was this? I think this was chapter 11. I think we're doing 11 and 12. Okay. Yeah, 11's Benjamin Tucker. Just as the idea of taking capital away from individuals and giving it to the government started Marx in a path which ends in the making of government everything and the individual nothing, so the idea of taking capital away from government-protected monopolies and putting it within easy reach of all individuals started Warren and Proudhon in a path which ends in making the individual everything and the government nothing. There are, like, it's one of those things where, like, so close, but yet so far. I agree with so much, but then they take a sharp left turn. The anarchists are simply unterrified Jeffersonian Democrats. No, I don't think so. They believe that the best government, I'll agree with this statement. I like this. They believe that the best government is that which governs least, and that which governs least is no government at all. I think I am going to tweet that. And we're going to finish up with Benjamin Tucker, and then in another show we'll do chapter 12, which is Peter Kropotkin. I always screw that name up as well. Upholding thus the right of every individual to be or select his own priest, they likewise uphold his right to be or select his own doctor. Mind your own business is its only moral law. Interference with another's business is a crime, and the only crime, as such, may be properly resisted. Agree. Parental rights must not be taken away, and parental responsibilities must not be foisted on others. Agree. Now, this is interesting. When he's dealing with parents, he kind of vests the entire authority in the mother. So, he says that the anarchists look forward to a time when every individual has an independent home of his own, whether that be rooms in a shared quarter or an independent structure, and that love relations between independent individuals shall be as varied as individual inclinations and attractions. And while I agree, like with that second part, what this is talking about, though, is the destruction of the family unit, where the father's not an intrinsic part, because he goes on to say that the children born of these relations shall belong exclusively to the mothers until they are old enough to belong to themselves. Says, I will call attention to the fact that it is he's talking about the socialists, that it is an ideal utterly consistent with that of the communists who falsely call themselves anarchists, while at the same time advocating a regime of archism fully as despotic as the state socialists themselves. The anarchists believe in liberty both as an end and a means, and are hostile to anything that antagonizes it. And while we arrive at different conclusions, because we do have some different presuppositions, I do agree with that statement. So then he says, there are two socialisms, one communistic, the other soliditarian. One is dictatorial, the other libertarian. One is metaphysical, the other positive. One is dogmatic, the other scientific. One is emotional, the other reflective. Okay, you know I'm not a fan of state socialists, but you can tell that this is just rhetoric right here. Nothing is quite that simplistic. One is destructive, the other constructive. Both are in pursuit of the greatest possible welfare for all. Maybe state socialism is in theory, but I think plenty of people who advocate it just see that they can then be the puppet master. One aims to establish happiness for all, the other to enable each to be happy in his own way. And that is it for Benjamin Tucker. So we will go to Peter Kropotkin. God, that name's going to kill me. In our next little installment, and I'm seeing how this is another longer chapter, so this is going to be fun. Alrighty. So you'll see me again, and hopefully it'll be this week, but I'm going to continue on this. Okay, for a second, I didn't know why my camera wasn't working. So we are continuing with Peter Kropotkin. Am I pronouncing that right? And hello, you can see Mr. Unicorn Head today, where I've reached my final form. So this is from The Conquest of Bread, dated 1892. No one has done as much to flesh out with what anarcho-communism would look like in practice as Peter Kropotkin. I tell you, listen, I love Michael Malice. I love that he compiled this history, but I've had about enough of the commies. Really, Kropotkin regarded anarchism as the evolved alternative to the might makes right social Darwinist worldview, and is quoted as saying, competition is the law of the jungle, but cooperation is the law of civilization. No, coercion is the law of the jungle. Not literally. Well, do animals, well, violence maybe is the better way to say it, and competition isn't violence. He envisioned a peaceful society where everyone would work to the benefit of all. Never going to happen. Where kindness and compassion motivated humanity. That can happen. Despite claims that he was utterly naive, it is violence that is by far the exception in interpersonal human interaction. Kropotkin's The Conquest of Bread remains the classic text in elucidating the Ancom perspective. Okay. So he starts off saying, every society which has abolished private property will be forced, we maintain, to organize itself. It's funny that he uses the word force. Now, I know he don't mean it in the sense of coercion. It means like because of necessity, but I just find that interesting. To organize itself on the lines of communistic anarchy. Anarchy leads to communism. No, it doesn't. Kiss my ass. And communism to anarchy. Both alike being expressions of the predominant tendency in modern societies, the pursuit of equality. Equity, maybe. The mitigated individualism. That tastes gross on my tongue. I want unmitigated individualism. Of the collectivist system certainly could not maintain itself alongside a partial communism, the socialization of land and the instruments of production. A new form of property requires a new form of this word always gets me. Remuneration, I thought was the way you said it. It says remuneration. Is that a word that we're going to look that up? I thought it was remuneration. If we're talking about like reward for work type thing, remuneration, money paid for work. I have had it backwards. Remuneration. I always thought it was remuneration. I'm going to look up that word too. Interesting. I've just always had that word wrong. I've learned something new in my unmitigated individualism. Okay, that's a new method of production cannot exist side by side with the old forms of consumption any more than it can adapt itself to the old forms of political organization. The wage system arises out of the individual ownership of the land and instruments of labor. It was the necessary condition for the development of capitalist production. God, I hate these. And will perish with it in spite of the attempt to disguise it as profit sharing. The common possession of the instruments of labor must necessarily bring with it the enjoyment in common of the fruits of common labor. Yeah. Okay, we're getting the idea here. I can only read so much commie stuff. and basically said that such arrangements are founded on the principle of take what you need, to each according to his needs. The tramway and railways have already introduced monthly and annual season tickets without limiting the number of journeys taken, because it's based on on a law of averages. And two nations, Hungary and Russia, have introduced on their railways the zone system, which permits the holder to travel 500 or 1,000 miles for the same price. That's like... to think that that entails communism. What if everybody decided to get on the train that day? It would collapse. It is but a short step from that to a uniform charge, such as already prevails in the Postal Service. Now, I don't have any problem with that. If a private industry decides that's the way it can maximize its efficiency while still maintaining profits. Now, of course, he's opposed to profits. But in a society where you have a lot of just mass transit, I can see that happening. I mean, even I ride the light rail in Colorado, even though it's ran by the frickin' state. When you buy a half-day pass, you could sit on the train for that entire half day if you wanted to, if you had nowhere else to go and you just felt like riding the train. One man wants to travel 1,000 miles, another 500. These are personal requirements. There's no sufficient reason why one should pay twice as much as the other because his need is twice as great. Such are the signs which appear even now in our individualist societies. Okay. I'm just seeing if there's... I think we know most of this. Let's see here. It's all typical commie stuff, like the day when the laborer may till the ground without paying away half of what he produces, the day when the machines necessary to prepare the soil for rich harvest are at the free disposal of the cultivators. How long will you have machines in such a system? Let me see if I really highlighted anything else. I did not highlight much in this because it seems like it's just retrotting things we already know. Yeah, we're going to just read the final paragraph and then that's going to do it. And we're going to go into chapter 13, which is Leo Tolstoy, in our next installment. Not this is going to get posted, but I mean the next video. Whether we like it or not, this is what people mean by a revolution. As soon as they have made a clean sweep of the government, they shall seek first to ensure to themselves decent dwellings and sufficient food and clothes, free of capitalist rent. You'll be free of having sufficient food and clothes is what you'll be free of. And the people will be right. The methods of the people will be much more in accordance with science than those of the economists who draw so many distinctions between instruments of production and articles of consumption. The people understand that this is just the point where the revolution ought to begin, and they will lay the foundations of the only economic science worthy of the name, a science which may be called the study of the needs of humanity and the economic means to satisfy them. All righty. Let's get this stitched together and posted.